Thank you for joining us for EMBCA's The Life and Legacy of Spyros P. Skouras, America's most influential Hellenic immigrant. My name is Lou Katsos, EMBCA's president, and we'll be co-moderating this discussion with EMBCA's Executive Vice President, Marina, Belessis, Casoria. A distinguished panel includes author, scholar, composer, research associate at Stanford University, Ilias, Chrissochoidis, PhD, author professor emeritus Peter Lev of Towson University, and author independent historical researcher Stavros Terry Stavridis. Spyros Skouras was a pioneering Hellenic American entrepreneur whose life embodied the immigrant success story and considered by many as the most influential Hellenic American in U.S. history. Born in Skourochori in Greece, he immigrated to the United States in 1910 with his two brothers, seeking a better life. Initially working as busboys and waiters, the Skouras brothers eventually entered the entertainment industry, opening a chain of movie theaters in St. Louis. Spyros Skouras became a transformative figure in the American film industry, leaving a legacy as one of Hollywood's most influential executives, as president of 20th Century Fox from 1942 to 1962. Under Skouras' leadership, 20th Century Fox produced a series of iconic films, including The Robe, the first movie shot on Cinemascope, as well as How to Marry a Millionaire and Cleopatra. He championed big-budget epics and star-studded productions that drew audiences back to theaters. Beyond his studio work, Skouras was an advocate for the global influence of American cinema, helping to expand its reach into international markets. His vision and business acumen reshaped Hollywood, turning it into a global cultural powerhouse. His contributions to the technological and artistic evolution of filmmaking ensured that movies remained the dominant force in entertainment, solidifying his place as a key architect of modern cinema. Skouras played a crucial role also in alleviating the suffering of millions of Hellenes during World War II through his leadership in the Greek War Relief Association, founded in 1940 in the US. The association established to provide aid to Ilias, which was suffering under Axis occupation and a devastating British naval blockade that restricted food and medical supplies. I'd like to also indicate, and part of the reason why you saw one of the logos that had to do with EMBCA 250, and this panel discussion will be the first of a series of discussions relating to EMBCA's American Hellenic U.S. Semi-Quintessential Committee, in short, EMBCA 250, to commemorate America's 250th anniversary, which is coming next year, and to highlight of the contributions of Hellenic Americans throughout the nation's history. And certainly, Spyros Skouras was one of those who contributed to this nation's history. I'd like to introduce our first panelist. Ilias Chrissochoidis was born in Thessaloniki to Pontian Greek parents. He holds professional degrees in piano performance and music theory and has two masters and a PhD in music history. After receiving his doctorate from Stanford, he remained at the university teaching part-time and pursuing advanced research centering on Handel's oratorios. He also continued pioneering research on Greek diaspora composer Nicholas Stavridis, creating a comprehensive video library on his life and works, and producing a full edition of his symphony 1821. A pianist and composer himself, he released 4 music albums, including the Greek-inspired Hellenotropia. His postdoctorate studies and postdoctoral research were largely supported by numerous fellowships from, among others, the Academy of Athens, the Onassis Foundation, Stanford Humanities Center, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Klug Center at the Library of Congress. In 2009, he joined the economics department at the University College in London, and in 2015, the Berlin Social Science Center, working on applications of game theory and opera analysis. Since November 2011, he has explored and promoted the Spyros P. Skouras papers at Stanford, and since January 2014, also the long-neglected modern Greek archival collections at the Hoover Institution. His compilation and edition on Skouras, autobiographical notes, is the most accurate account of the film magnate's life and career up to 1953. Two additional volumes of selected documents cover Skouras' 1953 monumental effort to implement Cinemascope and the ill-fated production of Cleopatra, which led to the resignation from 20th Century Fox presidency in 1962. Welcome, Ilias, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Lou, and I'm very delighted to join your panel in this webinar, together with two people that I, for a very long time, wanted to meet because they played so much a role as researchers, both in the Skouras paper and Greek diaspora and Greek immigration. I would like to start by sharing the PowerPoint presentation, which I created a few years ago as a Tsakopoulos Hellenic Collection Fellow in Sacramento. And it was meant to be a presentation that gives a comprehensive view of who Spyros Skouras was and what his main achievements were. So I will go through these slides one by one, reading from the text. And for your information, a video version of this presentation is available on YouTube. I hope there will be a dedicated web page after this webinar where we can post additional resources. And with this introduction, let's go on. So Spyros Skouras was born on March 28th, 1893 in Skourochori, as you said. This was a few miles away from ancient Olympia, and he was born to a family of farmers and herders. Life in rural Greece back then was harsh and, open to all kinds of emergencies and natural disasters. One such happened in 1907 and destroyed the family's crops and forced them to take emergency measures. The decision was the following. In a family of about 10 children, the older son would stay at home, take care of sisters and the family, whereas the second son would be sent to America and eventually could attract the other two sons. And this is what happened with Konstantinos, the person that here we know as Charlie Skouras, who was the elder of the three Skouras brothers here in America, who first went to America, emigrated in 1908 at age 19. And after 2 years, he was able to make enough money for Spyros' passage. So Spyros came to America in 1910, thanks to this effort and preparatory work of his brother Konstantinos, or Charlie. Here you see some postcard of St. Louis, the city where Konstantinos finally settled. Very often we talked about Spyros Skouras because he's the most famous of the three brothers, but as I indicated, we are talking about pretty much a minor version of an entire family emigrating to America, one after another, quite common back then. And as they assembled in St. Louis, they started working in some of the biggest hotels in the city. In a few years, they managed to accumulate enough capital to start thinking about setting up their own business. And the first such opportunity was when they acquired a stake at a local movie theater, which they named Olympia, obviously from something to remind them of their countries. And that was the beginning of the Skouras brothers' empire. During World War I, Spyros joined the US Air Force. He received ground training at the University of Texas, Austin, and the war unfortunately ended before he completed his flight training, so he returned back and rejoined his brothers in their growing operation. Within a few years, the three brothers managed to create a chain of movie theaters in St. Louis, and it's very moving to see some newspaper cuts from that period, from the early 1920s, referring to these three wonder boys from Greece that managed to accumulate so much wealth within a few years. By 1923, the Skouras brothers were the top theater operators in St. Louis. Among their innovations were the hiring of female ushers, the introduction of children's matinees, of jazz and large symphonic orchestras on the stage, and the famous precision dancers Missouri Rockettes, and of the now ubiquitous in-house confectionaries. We have to understand that at the time that the Skouras brothers entered into the movie business, actually the movie exhibition business, we had the Nickelodeons, which were places that usually people wouldn't want to see their families going there. So the vision of the Skouras brothers was to, probably inspired by the Greek theater and the importance that it had in ancient Greece, they wanted to transform these Nickelodeons and small movie theaters into civic palaces, really, where every man would like to bring his family, at the end of the week and have a really great time. Their crowning achievement, of course, in St. Louis was the luxurious Ambassador building and theater, which cost about $6 million and became one of the city's architectural landmarks. After negotiating the largest merger in film history, and this is something that Professor Lev will have to talk about, the Skouras moved to New York in 1929. What actually happened, and this has to do also with the big crash, they lost a lot of their assets in the big crash. And up to that point, the three brothers had a common bank account, if you can imagine that. So after the crash, Charlie moved to LA, and Skouras, Spyros, and George, his other brother, moved to New York. So this is the point where their careers separated. So for much of the 1930s, Spyros and George were involved in running theaters for Warner's and other companies in the New York area. In 1935, and this is the first date in Professor Lev's book, Skouras played a role in merging the two companies, Fox and 20th Century, and a few years later would become president of the company. Now, this is an important card, especially for this forum, Lou, because it gives you a summary of their business philosophy. So unlike many immigrants who came to this country thinking that they will make some money, then return back home and set up their own business, etc., the Skouras brothers had a very different vision. And this perhaps should become a topic later in our discussion, that is, how they behaved as immigrants, how they embraced American values and became responsible and prominent American citizens. But the whole idea is that they didn't enter the business just to make money, but also to offer to the society in general and creating better conditions and, of course, improving the film industry, which was still in its early stages. So this is a card, a very interesting one, and if you have a chance, you can read it later. During World War II, according to Skouras, the Skouras theaters in New York were the first to become issuing agents for Treasury Department war bonds. We are talking about billions of dollars raised, from the American public. And I might give you some more details later, but this was a key moment in the establishment of the Skouras brothers in the US government, let's say, in Washington, D.C., because the US government considered them pretty much heroes because of this initiative of offering the Treasury Department war bonds through the Skouras theaters, something that became a trend and other chains followed. Then we go to 1940, the invasion of Greece by Mussolini's troops, and the creation of the Greek War Relief Association. Here I have to say that there is an erroneous impression that Skouras was already president of 20th Century Fox. This is not true. The Greek War Relief Association was created pretty much the day after October 28, 1940. By that time, Skouras was not yet president. Actually, he would become president in 1942, which is a year and a half later. A lot can be said about the Greek War Relief Association, which Skouras really credits to the spiritual force of Archbishop Athenagoras, later Patriarch Athenagoras. And of course, Skouras really launched almost a second career there by becoming the executive officer of this organization. Using the latest advertisement techniques and recruiting prominent American citizens and Hollywood celebrities, the Greek War Relief Association managed to convey a powerful message of the urgency of saving the cradle of Western civilization from the Axis power. These are some of the impressive specimens of publicity for the Greek War Relief Association. An interesting detail is that William Hearst was a personal friend of Spyros Kouras, and Hearst lent part of his advertisement team to the Greek War Relief Association. So if you see some very striking images, etc., it's because of there was a lot of talent from the advertisement industry involved there. There were about 1,700 chapters of this organization, and Skouras tirelessly, toured the country, trying to raise funds, and of course, the most important thing, trying to lift the British blockade on Greece in order for this the shipment of foodstuff and medical supplies to go to the starving Greeks. The numbers are staggering. It is said that up to 3 million Greeks were saved from starvation or from consequences of disease, etc., during that period. And at least Skouras and the organization estimate that the total amount of help was up to $200 million back then in the early 1940s. In 1945, Skouras personally toured the war-ravaged Greece, and he came back in America and reported widely about the devastation that the country had suffered. And all of what we hear about the Marshall Plan aid and other stuff, the American aid to Greece after the war, had a lot to do with the Greek War Relief Association and the personal connections Skouras had with the US government. This is a card about Athenagoras. The most interesting story is that Skouras credits Athenagoras with inspiring him to offer more religious-themed films through 20th Century Fox. the story is in the memoirs, and it's worth reading. Also, Skouras played a role in the selection of Athenagoras as the next patriarch of Constantinople. I have a story from the papers that at one point George Marshall, who was the U.S. Secretary of State, called Skouras and asked his opinion about what he thinks about the next patriarch, etc. And Skouras, of course, fully recommended Athenagoras. And actually, once he was elected, he accompanied Athenagoras to Constantinople. And we have footage and photos from the ceremonies there. This is Fanari in Constantinople. Another involvement of all three Skouras brothers was with the creation of the wonderful, luxurious temple of St. Sophia, the Cathedral of St. Sophia in Los Angeles, which cost about $2 million, and where you have the burial there also. His inspiring leadership also turned Skouras into a Greek-American legend. As the most prominent American of Greek descent, he worked tirelessly to promote peace and prosperity in war-devastated Greece. This is from a contemporary publication, a newspaper, if I remember, where you have some prominent Greek Americans. I certainly recognize Mitropoulos, the New York Philharmonic Orchestra conductor, but also you have Dr. Papanikolaou and a very young John Cassavetes. Skouras used his close links with the US government, and this is a very important issue in his biography, to help Greece's interests. Not exactly solve, but help solve the Cyprus problem and maintain stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. I have to say that in my recollection, I don't know of any other Greek that had access to the White House under about 6 different administrations, starting with FDR, Harry Truman, Eisenhower, of course, even Kennedy, less so, certainly Johnson, and up to Nixon. The next few slides are about 20th century Fox films, and this will be for Professor Lev to comment on. What is interesting for Greece is the fact that Skouras promoted Greece as a tourist destination. If you remember the 300 Spartans and this kind of movies, they start with the most amazing views of Delphi, the Acropolis, even Meteora. Astonishing photography, top Hollywood quality. And of course, all of this, starting with the boy on a dolphin, etc., made Greece a major tourist attraction, starting already in the late 1950s. Also, Skouras, because of his political connections, helped launch the career of a lot of Greek-American politicians. You may recognize some of them. I think this one is the uncle of Zach Galifianakis, who I believe he was a congressman, John Brodimas, of course, Agnew, and this is Christopher, the mayor of San Francisco. Some of these are not recognizable anymore. The next cards are about 20th century Fox. I don't need to mention a lot about that. Cinemascope was the great event that made Skouras worldwide famous. And one reason I selected a number of documents on that monumental campaign in 1953 was exactly to give information to the research community and the general public about how important that moment was. This is the famous Life magazine story from 1953. this is the estimate for implementing Cinemascope. This was not simply shooting a film, but it was about subsidizing, movie theaters with this new technology. Another of Skouras' legacies, this time in Los Angeles, was, of course, the development of the 20th Century Fox studio backlot into the futuristic Century City. A very interesting figure here. 20th Century Fox was a multinational corporation, and believe it or not, it was not just involved in film production, but it had all kinds of other activities. I think it also involving the oil business, a lot of things. So because of that, and because of the offices they had in so many places, Skouras said he was traveling an average of 150,000 miles every year. This is an amazing statistic. Here again, my point about Skouras and his free access to the White House, here with Truman, of course, Eisenhower. I will share a story about Eisenhower later. Here with Johnson, interesting point. Even though Skouras was a lifelong Republican, when it came to the elections in 1964, he refused to vote for the Republican candidate, Barry Goldwater, because he thought he was too radical. So he voted, and he publicly supported his good friend Lyndon Johnson, who was a Democrat. Another good lesson for today's politicians and businessmen. Another famous moment was his exchange of some interesting words with Khrushchev in September 1959, when the Soviet premier visited Hollywood. And Skouras opened 20th Century Fox, even though it was a Saturday morning and they were supposed to be closed. And I have created a YouTube list with excerpts from that exchange between Khrushchev and Skouras. It's a very wonderful piece of history for people to watch and listen to. Another thing is the huge, let's say, activity of Skouras in various fundraisers. You see here with George Marshall, Eleanor Roosevelt. She was a member of numerous boards, educational and humanitarian ones in the United States. Here is a card about his brief involvement with a program of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra under Dimitri Mitropoulos. The important thing is that back in the 1950s, Skouras was considered one of the most prominent immigrants in the country. And this is interesting to contrast with what happened after his death, when he was practically forgotten. And we can talk about that later. This is again, Nelson Rockefeller. Skouras considered himself a progressive Republican. So for him, after Eisenhower, Rockefeller was the best candidate that the Republican Party could possibly have as a president. So he supported him very much. Also, his son-in-law, Skouras' son-in-law, was a close associate of the Rockefeller. This is about the celebration of his 20 years at the helm of 20th Century Fox, Cleopatra, which cost him his job. And this is, I think, this is the New York Times obituary. And this is an appropriate title, The Colossal Optimist. Now, during the last years of his life, he was involved in the shipping business together with his son, Spyros Solon. He had an ambitious program of replacing current commercial vessels in the US with a new program that would cost a total of $250 million. But unfortunately, there was a lot of reaction from New York shipyard unions, and this didn't go through. A very sad statistic about the family is that it seems that there is a very bad gene running through this family, and it concerns heart disease. All three brothers and the brother that stayed in Greece all died of heart failure causes. So Charlie and George both died in their mid-60s. Spyros was lucky enough, he had a serious operation in 1962, exactly at the time of the great crisis with Cleopatra, and he managed to live another 9 years. But of course, he died in 71 at age 78. These are the two things that he wanted to be remembered of. First, having brought Cinemascope to the motion picture industry at a time of crisis for the industry. And second, because he helped lift the blockade in Greece and saving millions of his compatriots from starvation. Here are some resources. And I think this is a very general kind of introduction. You can watch the video. I return back to you, Lou.
Thank you, Ilias. Thank you for the presentation. It was very enlightening. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Well, for the audience, let me mention that when we talk about St. Louis at the time that the Skouras brothers were there, it was the fourth largest American city. So when we think about St. Louis, we say, oh, St. Louis is not a big deal. But when they were there, it was in fact a big deal. In terms of the war bonds, there are other people that claim that they were also selling a lot of war bonds, in particular HEPA. Was he a member of a HEPA or not really?
They were members, they had some, but the real involvement of all three brothers with Greek causes happened after the Greek War Relief Association.
Okay, very good. And we'll touch on that when we get into the open discussion, because I think that's kind of important. And I think you alluded to it earlier in your presentation. I'd like now to introduce our co-moderator today, and she's the Executive Vice President of EMBCA. Marina is the President of Ideas Unlimited, a creative development consultant at the intersection of communications, strategy programming, and resource development for philanthropy and impact investing. Marina has served as a member of the public affairs team at Con Edison, managing corporate social responsibility, philanthropy, strategic partnerships, government, and community affairs. She is a certified fundraising executive and holds the CFRE International Credential in Fundraising Management with over 25 years' experience working with nonprofit organizations. Marina has helped to fundraise over $50 million for nonprofit organizations with a focus on social services for children and families in need. Expertise in strategic partnerships includes education, environmental sustainability, workforce and economic development, arts and culture, civic and community, ethnic and religious communities. Marina was the founding board member of EEST, Greek woman helping Greek women, dedicated to supporting victims of family violence. Her community service includes membership in boards of directors, including Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow, the Dodge YMCA in Brooklyn Center for the Performing Arts at Brooklyn College, and Hope Program Business Advisory Council. She serves, as I indicated earlier, as on the board of directors, as also an executive vice president of EMBCA. She holds a master's degree of science in organizational leadership, a certificate in fundraising management from New York University, and has a congressional citation awarded by Congresswoman Carol Maloney for outstanding efforts and invaluable contributions to the United States of America. Thank you, Marina, for being with us today and co-moderating this great discussion.
Thank you so much, Lou, for all you do for the future of Hellenism and for bringing Spyros Skouras legacy today to us. I'd like to introduce Peter Lev. Professor Peter Lev is Professor Emeritus of the Electronic Media and Film at Towson University in Maryland. He received his PhD in Film Studies from UCLA in 1980. He is the author of 5 books of film history and co-editor of 1 anthology. In 2009, he received an Academy Scholars Award from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to support his research on the book 20th Century Fox, the Zanuck Skouras Years, 1935 to 1965, published in 2013. Other awards include the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Literature Film Association and the Distinguished Service to the University Award from Towson University 2010 to 2011. His 5 books include the 20th Century Fox Zanuck Skouras Years, the Euro-American Cinema, American Films of the 70s, Conflicting Visions, the 50s, Transforming the Screen, 1950 to 1959, History of American Cinema, and Claude Lelouch, Film Director. So please join me in welcoming Professor Peter Lev, the author of the book, which I highly recommend, the 20th Century Fox, the Zanuck Skouras Years, 1935 to 1965. Thank you so much, Professor Lev.
Thank you, Marina. I would say good afternoon to everyone, but people are in different time zones. One of our panelists is in Australia. So good day or night, wherever you are. I'm going to talk about how I came to write a book about 20th Century Fox and Spyros Skouras. About 25 years ago, I was looking for a topic for my next book. I focused on writing a history of one of the 4 largest Hollywood studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, Fox, or Paramount. I found out that there were multiple books on MGM and Warner Brothers, 1 book not that useful on 20th Century Fox, and basically nothing on Paramount. I decided to write a history of 20th Century Fox because it had the best stories to tell. There was the cautionary tale of William Fox, who expanded too fast and lost ownership of the Fox Film Corporation during the Depression. There was Darryl Zanuck, a charismatic producer with a handful of Academy Awards. There was the introduction of Cinemascope, the widescreen process which helped the film industry survive in the 1950s, and also the debacle of Cleopatra, a cursed film, as the French would say, where everything went wrong, and the film cost $40 million instead of $5 million, and yet on release, it made most of the money back. In my preliminary research, I discovered the extensive Spyros Skouras collection at Stanford University Special Collections. My daughter was an undergrad at Stanford, and so that probably helped. I could visit her and visit the Skouras collection, and it was very, very nice combination of things. This gave me a new perspective on 20th Century Fox. The company had 2 charismatic leaders, Darryl Zanuck, the gifted producer based in Los Angeles, and Spyros Skouras, the gifted businessman based in New York. Zanuck was in charge of production, very important. Skouras and his 2 brothers, Charles and George, managed Fox theater chains. So even though Spyros was in New York and Charles was in Los Angeles, they were actually for many years working for the same company. That the theater chains were part of 20th Century Fox until about 1950. Spyros Skouras was also in charge of advertising, publicity, sales, international sales, distribution, newsreels, and so on. When Zanuck and Skouras worked together, results were excellent, but they often fought verbally, not physically, contesting territory. Skouras thought their arguments were productive, that Fox benefited from the 2 leaders eventually coming to a resolution. I'm not so sure. Fox prospered when each leader stuck to his lane, Zanuck making films and Skouras managing other parts of the business. When they collaborated on the rollout of Cinemascope, the result was a high point for the company and for the film industry as a whole. I should also note that the Zanuck-Skouras relationship changed over time. In the mid-1950s, Zanuck had a midlife crisis and left his job in Los Angeles to make a series of films, most of them mediocre in Europe. At this point, Skouras became more involved in the production side of the business. So, when you had a partner who was really, really good, even though you argued with them all the time, it must have been a terrible blow when Zanuck just left. And Skouras suddenly had more responsibilities. Skouras eventually overreached. He knew less about production than he thought he knew, and he had the wrong people helping him. In 1962, with Cleopatra still unfinished and Fox near bankruptcy, the board of directors appointed Zanuck to replace Skouras as president. Skouras became chairman of the board at Fox, a mainly ceremonial position. My Fox book was a huge project. In the years I mainly covered, 1942 to 1965, the company produced close to 1,000 feature films. I haven't seen all of them. I think I've seen 200. Important personalities were involved, from Spyros Skouras to Marilyn Monroe. Film history intertwined with political history. World War II, the Hollywood blacklist, the Cold War. Both Zanuck and Skouras did extraordinary things during the war. Zanuck made speeches around the country in 1940 and 1941, pushing for American aid for Great Britain at a time when the U.S. was officially neutral. Then in 1942, when the U.S. was in the war, Zanuck became a full-time officer in the Army Signal Corps and made a film about the North African campaign. Made a film sometimes under fire in North Africa. Skouras, as chairman of Greek War Relief, negotiated a way to get North American food supplies to Greece despite the Nazi occupation, and thus saved millions of lives. This was an extraordinary achievement. Ilias has mentioned it, and I'm sure we'll have more to say about it later. And this is a favorite episode of mine, which I guess is also a favorite of Ilias. Film history meeting political history when Nikita Khrushchev visited Los Angeles in 1959. Khrushchev wanted to visit Disneyland, but was denied for security reasons. Just imagine the leader of Russia today saying, I want to go to Disneyland. Khrushchev had to settle for a luncheon with Hollywood celebrities at 20th Century Fox, hosted by Spyros Skouras. After the meal, Skouras and Khrushchev gave surprisingly combative speeches on the merits of the American and Soviet systems, including interrupting each other. What a triumph for Skouras, debating the leader of the Soviet Union on equal terms. In 2009, I won an Academy Scholars Award, as Marina mentioned, from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to support my 20th Century Fox research. This was a highly competitive grant, 104 applicants that year and only 2 awards. When I went to Los Angeles to pick up the award, I found that the selection committee was impressed by my focus on Fox's New York office. The Motion Picture Academy includes people in public relations, advertising, producing, which has a strong business component, and other specialties. It is not just actors and directors. By writing about Skouras and the New York office, I was reorienting Hollywood film industry history and representing these Academy members. The New York corporate headquarters were important. To give a few examples of other studios, Louis B. Mayer of MGM was a famous production executive, but he had a boss, Nicholas Schenck in New York. Jack Warner of Warner Brothers supervised the studio's productions for many years, but the company president was his older brother, Harry, in New York. At Fox, Darryl Zanuck had considerable autonomy because of his track record, but Spyros Skouras had at least equal power. In a nice serendipity, the president of the Motion Picture Academy in 2009 was the producer Sid Ganis, whose first job in the film industry was as a very junior publicist at 20th Century Fox in New York in the early 1960s. Sid generously granted me an interview. He recalled how reporters would gather at the Fox office in Manhattan, waiting for news from the production of Cleopatra in Rome, which arrived daily by airplane. It was a different time. He also talked about the release of The Longest Day, Zenek's stand-up production of the early 1960s, where Zenek somehow managed to close down Fifth Avenue for a parade. For Sid, Spyros Skouras was the big boss, whom he saw only a few times when there was a meeting for the entire staff. I concluded my 20th Century Fox book in 1965 rather than 1962 because I wanted to end on a high note. The Sound of Music, released by Fox in 1965, was an enormous blockbuster, earning $110 million or more than $1 billion in 2025 dollars. So the studio, on the verge of bankruptcy 3 years before, was now in terrific shape. The Sound of Music was a great achievement of the Zanuck administration, but it also showed the fingerprints of Spyros Skouras. In 1959, Skouras attended the premiere of the musical play The Sound of Music. Then the next morning, he bought the film rights. By contract, release of the film was delayed at least 5 years, so as not to compete with the theatrical run. In 2013, my book was finally published by University of Texas Press. Coincidentally, Ilias's 3 volumes, taken from the Spyros Skouras collection at Stanford, were published in the same year. So Spyros Skouras was finally getting his due as a leader of the Hollywood film industry and a figure of national and international significance. I would like to know more about Spyros's brother, Charles and George Skouras, who are also very successful film industry executives. Perhaps someone in the audience today will tell their stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you, Marina, for introducing Peter. It seems, Peter, that this was quite a giant, I guess, within the industry. And you mentioned that we don't know enough about his brothers. Was he also a salesperson on himself, or what was the story with him?
Well, he really collected just about everything, you know, all of his correspondence, all of the business records. And so from 1942 on, just the data that you have to work with is just extraordinary. I talked after publication of my book. I talked a little bit with a member of the family who said that the earlier records were maybe destroyed in a fire, but from 1942 on, just the records are extensive, and I don't know of anything corresponding with that with Charles or George Skouras.
How did Ilia, you can respond also. How did Stanford get the let's say these records and files that they got? Who gave them? The family, or who gave the records and correspondence, etc., to Stanford?
I hope I won't take time from Terry, because this is a long story. But very briefly, Skouras died in 1971. Unfortunately, he died heavy in debt, and there were problems in the family settling his huge debt with the shipping company. We know that his archive was donated to Stanford again because of a family member who studied at the Graduate School of Business here. So the archive was not complete. There was a missing part. It was donated in '88. And my understanding is that its current structure in subject matter instead of chronologically, which would help me a lot if I wanted to write a full biography. But it also helped Professor Lev because he could concentrate on specific productions, etc. This part of the archive became available in '92, and until the books that Professor Lev mentioned, published in 2013, I don't find many citations on this collection. And there is an issue here that probably will have to discuss later, because we have so many important historical personalities. How do we know about them? Through gossip, through newspaper articles, or through archival resources? And who has the archives? Who is going to preserve them? Who is going to grant permissions? We still have problems with copyright issues. The Skouras archive is also an archive of 20th century Fox. And, there are many issues here. There are things to be said. So I think on this level, even though 2013 was an important year for Skouras publicity, etc., we also lost a lot of time because of complications that had to do with the family history and relations between members of the family, and also other issues that might have with academic bureaucracy, etc. Hopefully we'll have, I know that there is some new material coming out in St. Louis, actually, but I hope we'll be able to get more material. More on that later.
Peter, let me. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but in terms of you focusing, I understand that you were at Stanford anyway because of the family. But how did you zero in on the archival information yourself?
So I don't remember if it was on the internet or just visiting that library and saying, well, what do you have on film industry stuff? And they don't have much on film industry stuff, but they have this enormous, really, really helpful collection on Spyros Skouras. And I would say that if you're interested in 20th Century Fox or Spyros Skouras and you don't know that collection, you are in bad shape.
And this collection is accessible to others, or how does it work?
Yeah, you can just walk in. When special collections is open. I don't think I mean, I'm an academic researcher, and that gives me some qualifications that other people don't have, but I'm not sure that really applies in this case.
Thank you so much. Our next panelists, I'm glad to see Stavros Terry Stavridis being with us today. He's obviously coming from Australia down under. It's obviously Monday there. It's not even Sunday. And obviously he's been with us very early on. So Stavros was born in Cairo, Egypt, and came with his parents to Australia. He has also lived in Portland, Oregon for a couple of years and looks forward to returning again to the US. He holds an honors degree in European history from Deakin University and a master's degree in history from RMIT in Australia. He has taught at the university level and community colleges, both in Australia and the United States. He has written a couple of books, notably The Greek-Turkish War, 1919 to 1923, Assyrians Through Australian Documents, and several contributing chapters. He also is a regular contributor to the National Herald in New York. I mean, he has weekly columns, and many people read, obviously, what he has to say. His main areas of interest are the Asia Minor Campaign, 1919 to 1923, during the Balkan Wars and the First World War, Middle East Greek, and Armenian, and Assyrian genocides, also with their main emphasis with the involvement of great powers. Thank you, Stavros, for being with us today. And we woke you up, but you're always welcome here anytime. Thank you for being with us today, Stavros.
Thank you, Lou, for that wonderful introduction. How did I start my journey on Spyros Skouras? It actually came by accident. I remember some years ago, I did write an article for the National Herald on the Greek War Relief Association without even taking note of the name of Skouras. So when you invited me onto this panel, I said, well, I got to do some homework on this guy. And much to my surprise, I found quite a lot of references to him in the State Department collections during the Second World War and beyond. And that's just triggered my interest to learn more about this amazing man. I'd like to thank Ilias for sending me a copy of his biography. Thank you very much, Ilias. What do I get out of this man? He was an amazing human being. He came from a background of poverty in Greece, came to the United States and fulfilled, like so many immigrants, the American dream. And he fulfilled it more than 100 times. I just like, before I get into the Greek war relief effort, my dear friend and colleague here, Professor Anastasios Tamis, who's actually an authority on the Greek diaspora, sent me 3 interesting articles which he translated for me from the Hellenic Herald, which is a Greek Australian newspaper. And this is from page 1, November 13, 1952. And it says here, structural issues, Spyros Skouras of 20th Century Fox Film Corporation invited 70 journalists of a reception at Hotel Australia, Sydney, and the language press was represented by Theo Nikolaidis and Alex Griffiths. Skouras' arrival produced an echo of support for the local Hellenes. Now we go to October 1959. Greek-Turkish relations amity. And it talks about him attending an event where you have the Turkish ambassador to the US, the director of the CIA, George Allen, the tycoon of the American press, William Hearst, and the reception for Fermenderus organized by Archbishop Yakovos. And then in March 1960, he actually has a dig. He criticizes the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church, Ezekiel, where he neglected the communities and turned his attention to a few groups of people who wished to build new chapels, small churches, thus augmenting their influence. This man, from what I've heard so far, he was a unifier. I wish our Greek communities today, both in Australia and the United States, had someone of his ilk who would unite the communities. He was a doer, and his record, it shows very clearly from his movie contributions right through to his public work in relief work and so on. Now I'll get on to my main topic. And firstly, I'd like to thank the State Library of Victoria in Melbourne, who actually subscribed to a company called Gale Resources, who actually produce a whole bunch of digital resources. For example, like the State Department collections, starting from 1820 to about the 1970s. And that's where I got the bulk of my information. And also to add another Australian perspective, I checked Trove, Trove, which belongs to the National Library of Australia, and there are quite a few references to Skouras' visit here in Australia, and they do talk about Cinemascope that was mentioned earlier. So he does have a profile down under. So I'm very privileged to have had the opportunity to look at this great man. Now, when the Italians invaded Greece on October 1940, the Greek American organizations mobilized. They saw that Greece was going to be in trouble. Like true patriots, they wanted to send relief of some kind to Greece. And the Ammonia organization in New York started the whole process. It was Archbishop Athenagoras on November 7th, 1940, who convened a meeting in New York City where he invited all the Greek American organizations there. And they came up with the association known as the Greek War Relief Association. And they elected Spyros Skouras as national president. And they launched an immediate campaign to raise $10 million to aid Greece. And the GWRA was incorporated in New York, in the state of New York. Now, also too, from what I see here is that major organizations like HEPA, GAPA supported the work of the Greek Relief Association. Skouras then embarked on a national speaking tour of Greek American communities to promote the work of the GWRA. Community involvement was crucial, and of course many, and also to Greek Americans that responded magnificently by donating and sending money through this organisation. To make the organisation more accessible to the wider American community, as was stated earlier, he enlisted scores of film actors, entertainers, and so on to help raise awareness and raise funds for the Greek cause. Now, I'll come straight to the State Department records. In 1941, there seemed to be a sort of a problem of trying to send money and relief to Greece. Firstly, you had the blockade by Great Britain, and nothing could get in or get out. The Relief Association wanted to send money, but they couldn't send it directly to Greece because it was an American organisation. And I'm just going from memory now. This is a very challenging topic like that. But anyway, from what I can get out of all this, during 1941 overall, the death rate in Greece was increasing, and money and relief supplies had to get there. Around August, September, that there was discussions of sending relief to Greece, and one of the ideas that came up, and it was implemented for a short time, was through Turkey, and two Turkish ships, the Kurtulus, went on a couple of trips to Greece with relief, but that didn't last very long because the Turks had their own problems, because their own wheat production was going to be very short to feed their own people. So they had to come up with something different. So in the end, the idea was to come up with a neutral country, and so Sweden was brought into the picture, and of course they had to find a way to overcome the blockade. So the United States, Great Britain, and the GWRA, they worked very closely together, and they convinced the British government to at least allow relief work to get into Greece, and finally the Swedish ships. There were about 8 ships that eventually took relief to Greece through Canada. And Spyros Skouras' organisation also played a very important role in establishing a chapter or a branch in Canada. So the Greek-Canadian organisation, or the equivalent of the GWA in Canada, also was involved in the raising of funds and sending to Greece. Now the biggest problem out of all this was trying to convince the Axis powers to allow relief to reach Greece. There were a lot of reports coming back of people dying, and the numbers were increasing, especially in the latter part of 1941. And there are reports which I found in the State Department documents where reading it, I almost burst into tears. You know, people dying every day, and the numbers were increasing. They had a ration card for bread, and the people who were dying, who died, they would steal their ration card so they wouldn't lose their daily ration. They didn't have time to bury people properly. They just used to bury them in mass graves. And we're really grateful, and I say this, I'm very grateful to Mr. Skouras and his organization that did such a fantastic job sending relief to Greece, which saved a lot of lives. And I think that one of the quotes that was mentioned earlier, that it saved a couple of million people from starvation. I take off my hat to this man. He really deserves that. But in 1943, Skouras actually appeared before one of the committees in the Congress, and he actually outlined the whole raison d'etre of the Greek war relief. And then, of course, he became involved, he also played a very important role, for example, post-World War II, with relief to Greece, with the Civil War and so on. One thing that I found very interesting was that he visited Korea during the Korean War, and he actually met the Greek, Turkish, and even American officers, fighting there. All I can say about this man is that he really typified the American dream. The individual who came with nothing, built up an empire, and I think we're all greatly indebted to this man, that we can go and watch some great movies that he made. By the way, I've seen some of the movies which he's made, and I really loved them. And I'd like to learn more about this man, and I'd like to do somewhere along the way to look at more State Department documents to write something substantial about his contribution and involvement with the Greek war relief. I'm not a film historian. My area is history. I could talk. I've got all these documents here from the State Department collection, thanks to the of Victoria. It's just and also too here. There's also too a memorandum of shipments of Swedish ships, and of course to send all this relief from the United States and Canada. They needed permits from the State Department, and of course the Canadians had to get a permit from their own external affairs department. But overall, we've got to thank this man, his organisation, and the Swedish ships that brought the monthly shipments of wheat and other medicines and so on to do that. And also my final thing here is, we still got to thank the American Red Cross, because like in Asia Minor in 1922-23, if it wasn't for the American relief organizations like the Near East Relief and the American Red Cross, and also the YMCA or YWCA, if it wasn't for these American organizations, thousands of Greeks would have perished 20 years earlier. And so thank you very much, USA.
Thank you, Stavros, for that. I will just divert a little bit and just, for the audience, there were a lot of issues, obviously, with the starvation that took place during the Nazi occupation of Greece. One of the issues, obviously, had to do with them taking a lot of the food supplies from the local populations, to feed basically the soldiers that had come into the country, which caused, by the way, that particular issue and famine. I will add, but this has nothing to do with this particular panel discussion, there will be demonstrations in Athens in the next few days that have to do with the Nazis who took tens of millions of dollars during that particular time from the country. And they're going to basically demonstrate at the German embassy in Greece. With that, let me open up the discussion so we can talk about this. Ilias, I think in one of your books, you had mentioned the lobbying, actually, that Spyro did within the United States, and the linkages with American politicians, etc. that then transmitted that information to the British officials to actually start to end the blockade, if you will, or at least allow ships to be coming into the nation. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
The connections with the American political scene are far too many to mention, but I will give you a story that probably nobody knows because it comes from persons that personally knew Skouras. This is about how Eisenhower was convinced to accept the nomination from the Republican Party to run as a president in 1952. Historians will probably remember that there was a huge rally, a huge event in Madison Square Garden in New York for Ike. And Skouras, Ike, at that time, Eisenhower was the head of NATO. I think he was in Paris. And Skouras arranged, using the resources of Movietone, which is another chapter that one should mention among the things that Skouras helped develop. So he filmed the event, and he immediately shipped a copy of the film to Paris for the general to watch. And it was the time that Eisenhower was not certain if he should run, if he should accept. And he was so much moved by this demonstration of public love that he eventually accepted the nomination of the Republican Party, and hence we have the 8 years of Eisenhower presidency, which for many is considered, the closest America has come to the American dream, really. It was the age of big infrastructure projects and so many other things. So that would be about another thing that you will be interested to hear is how he used, Skouras used Cinemascope to get closer to world leaders. We know that one of the first Cinemascope machines, projection machines, were sent to Downing Street. At the time, Churchill was prime minister. It was his second tenure in the office. And we have in the archive, this is the amazing thing about the Skouras papers. At least in the correspondence section, you will find the most famous names, in the second half of the 20th century. World leaders from Israel to Egypt. You'll find some thank you notes from Winston Churchill. You'll find so much correspondence directly from the White House, from Eisenhower, from Harry Truman, Johnson, Nixon, etc. This is an amazing collection. When I first got involved in that, I had no idea that about Professor Lev's visits and later the award. So I was taken aback because this was so important. And it's not just about film history. The Skouras papers, the Skouras archive, here you have an intersection of different histories. You have American political history, you have the American history of foreign aid. And here the Gregory Leaf Association was considered back then the most successful foreign aid campaign because of Skouras' skills. And you have, of course, Greek American history, diaspora studies, etc. Also, the role of Skouras and people of that generation in shaping the profile of the Greek Orthodox Church in America. All of this can be found there. Also, investment plans for Greece. A lot of things he tried to do during the 50s, etc., together with Greek leadership. People don't know that Skouras tried to bring private television to Greece in the early 60s. He tried, but he couldn't do it.
Good luck of bringing anything to Greece. But a lot of lot of wealthy people have tried to establish all types of businesses there and failed, quite frankly,
The
for
other
many
thing-
reasons. For many reasons.
The other thing about his relation with the U.S. Government establishment and the political forces is the fact that they were really all three brothers. They took very seriously their American citizenship. They were not here to make big bucks back and go back to Greece, etc. They took the American citizenship. As I said, Spyros was trained in Texas as a pilot. And there is an interesting anecdote. There is a kind of reception where the Queen Federica of Greece is present, and she talks to him as if he is a Greek immigrant in American. And he interrupts her and says, I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I'm an American citizen, but coming from Greece, and I love my country, but first and foremost, I'm an American citizen. This is something that the US establishment really, really appreciated. And in fact, we have Eisenhower writing to one of his assistants about Skouras. There is no doubt about the patriotism of Spyros, and they had a very good and close relationship. A final thing is that I don't believe that Skouras is yet present in American political history or general culture. What Professor Lev has done is indeed as unique and groundbreaking as he mentioned. But this is film history. I would like to see Skouras being integrated in American political and general cultural history, because in an article I wrote, I called Skouras the most influential Greek since Alexander the Great, and this sounds very exaggerated. But try to realize that 20th century folks, in these 20 years that Skouras was at the helm of the company, had the company reached out to an audience of 250 million people around the world. So who name another Greek that could have this kind of influence to so many people since Alexander? So I think we are still at the very beginning of realizing what his contributions were. It was a heroic generation. Somewhere he says that we had good genes, not on health and other issues, but they had the moral, the moral stamina, etc., to produce and not only accept the American values, but also to project them worldwide. And this is still, diplomacy through culture, diplomacy through personal relations, all of these things, the things you won't find in the archives of government departments. They are there, they're part of history, and very often we need to find, the last surviving person of a generation to tell us that, this and that happened. So
this is all very interesting. Yeah, the reality is, if you went to just about anybody in the street and ask them about Spyros Skouras, no one knows about Spyros Skouras. Not only in Greece, but also in the United States, which is very interesting. Marina, I think you had some questions for Peter, or no? Are you with us, Marina? Yes.
Yes, I was interested in the merger. What was Spyros's role in the merger of 20th Century and Fox? And how did William Fox lose his company? Was it L.B. Mayer and his Hoover relationship with the president, and was that an impetus for the political alliance between the government and the Hollywood film industry? I think it's a very symbiotic relationship during the war, and then of course the anti-competitive nature, which actually helped, I think, destroy the film industry's great strengths that were there during the war. So I'm just curious about the business history, and I guess Professor Lev could answer that, and just Hollywood and propaganda in general. I think Professor Chrissochoidis has talked a little bit about the importance of projecting American values. But I'm wondering today if there are relationships that could be improved to project American values, again, in the way that was so effectively done during the war. Of course, the anti-fascist, anti-Nazi efforts that helped win the war.
Okay, so a lot of questions. Let's talk about the mergers. In the late 1920s, which of course was a boom time, the Hollywood companies were sort of gobbling up each other, smaller competitors, but sometimes a smaller company would merge with a larger one. So there was a real consolidation. And William Fox, the founder of the Fox Film Corporation, basically tried to take over the whole film industry, and taking out loans to do so. He tried to buy the competitor MGM, and there are stories about how Louis B. Mayer appealed to Washington to make that merger not happen. And I think there's probably some truth to those stories. So Spyros Skouras was in the middle of some of these negotiations. To me, probably the most interesting one was earlier. There was a company called First National Pictures, which was a consortium of regional film exhibitors like Skouras Brothers Theaters in St. Louis. So there were Stanley Theaters in Philadelphia. Groups all around the country got together and said, the big companies are getting to be too big, too monopolistic. Let's join forces and we'll start our own film production business to support our theaters. So Spyros Skouras was a trustee of one of those companies, of the consortium. And the problem with the consortium was that nobody was really in charge. If there were 25 or 30 partners, who's running the show? And they went through a bunch of different leaders. At one time, Joseph P. Kennedy, President Kennedy's father, was the head of production for First National Pictures, but it wasn't working. And so eventually, Skouras approached Warner Brothers and said, how about if we talk about merging First National with Warner Brothers? And that did happen. And the Skouras brothers became briefly executives at Warner Brothers, which had a nationwide chain of theaters, plus the First National theaters. Well, evidently promises were broken. Spyros Skouras and Harry Warner did not get along for very long at all. And so then, Skouras is this nationally important film executive without a company. And I think they actually lost control of the Skouras theaters in St. Louis. So then he went to Paramount briefly. And then he went to Fox. And Fox was in receivership. William Fox had just sort of combusted, and there were lawsuits and so on and so forth. So the Skouras brothers went to work to get the Fox theaters out of bankruptcy, which eventually happened. Now, how much he had to do with the merger between 20th Century, a small company, and Fox, a big company, I really don't know. According to him, he was in the middle of everything. According to the memoir that Ilias published, he did the merger. If you read the newspaper accounts, it doesn't say that. So I don't know in that case. I do know, well, and another factor in there was that basically the Chase Bank owned 20th Century Fox. So you had this company, you're trying to get it on its feet, but you also had the bank that owned the majority interest, and you had to deal with that. So somehow out of that, they merged with 20th Century. The main asset of 20th Century was Daryl Zanuck. He was the production guy at 20th Century. It worked. Fox almost immediately became profitable. Zanuck and Skouras worked together, sort of. That would actually make a great movie, how those two guys yelled and screamed at each other and yet yet work together. And a lot of that is documented in the Skouras collection. So, coming out of the merger, you had this big company that was successful for many years, 20th Century Fox. It's hard to imagine now a media landscape where you have no television, you have no internet, you have film and radio and newspapers. And so film is enormously influential. Film is the visual medium that everybody sees. And I think Ilias said it, one of the things Fox had was a weekly newsreel. So you got your visual news in the theaters from the newsreel. And the newsreel was based in New York, so it was basically a Skouras project. So that's one of the ways that American values were projected not only in this country, but around the world.
So are these the newsreels we used to watch when we went to the movies in the old days?
Yeah.
They were all his? They were all
Well, no, I mean, several companies had newsreels, but Fox had Movie Tone News, which was a weekly newsreel, and it was finally ended by Zanuck in the 1960s. When Skouras was in charge, they were still making newsreels, but Zanuck decided that television news had really taken over, and we don't need to do this.
Let me ask you, gentlemen, a question, because you've both looked at the records. How many records are there actually? When we say records, what are we talking about? Are they in boxes? Are they loose? How are they? What form are these records in? What form are these records in?
They're paper records. They're in boxes. They are extremely well cataloged, but they're not chronological.
And how many boxes are we talking about if we had to guess?
Do you have an idea?
Oh,
yeah.
When we were working on these papers, that is before 2013, there were about 86 boxes.
Mm.
However, I told you earlier that during the 60s, Skouras was under some kind of pressure to release his own autobiography. So he hired a young assistant to help him draft a manuscript that would eventually be published. Unfortunately, during the 60s, late 60s, a not very wise relative of his released a book that it lacks documentation, and it's not considered from a historical perspective
It's
accurate.
terrible. This is called Skouras, King of Fox Studios.
Yeah, totally inaccurate king.
Not only inaccurate, but terribly written.
Unfortunately, this was the only resource that scholars had until 2013, unless they could use the Life magazine article or some other things. And this created a lot of problems because there are inaccuracies that you cannot believe. Like Skouras appears to come to this country alone, when in fact we have a group of 3 brothers, and there are other things. So until 2013, etc., we had 86 boxes of documents, a lot of which are copies of his papers at the 20th Century Fox. An aside here, I have been told that when Fox moved the headquarters from New York City to LA, they destroyed or abandoned their archives. So you can imagine how important are to have these copies of Skouras correspondence here at Stanford. I don't know anything about Zanuck's archives, whatever he must have kept. The other thing about Stanford is 2017, the family managed to recover the lost part of the archive. And this lost part includes boxes of the minutes of the Greek War Relief Association, which is the source for anybody to write, about this organization.
And where are those? Yeah, I'm sorry. Where are those boxes? They're now in Stanford.
Yes.
Okay.
They also recovered some boxes of old-type magnetic tapes, including Skouras reminiscing about his life, etc. This is extremely valuable, but I have to say a member of the family has some kind of objections in using them publicly. These are, old type tapes that have been digitized, but they don't come with a catalog. There are no labels. So we are talking about over 100 hours, etc. Skouras talking about anything, about meeting with FDR, about how he met with Churchill in England, how he helped lift the blockade, all kinds of things, including Cleopatra and other productions. It's a valuable material, and we have this issue with copyrights, and Stanford is very, very vigilant, being a wealthy university. You cannot do anything without lawyers being involved and telling you you can do that, or this might be under copyright protection, etc. So right now, even I am in a very difficult position.
So, Ilias, let's say Stavro wanted to go to the archives to do research on the Greek War Relief Association, which you said there's a lot of boxes, etc. And maybe it's the place to go to relating to the Greek War Relief Association. Would he have a problem with getting that material and writing something, or he'd have to go with lawyers, or how does this work?
No, the lawyers come when you want to publish, to reproduce from that. If you want to write a summary, etc., no problem.
No issue. But
you are supposed to ask for written permission from the copyright owner. But if you don't know if something belongs in the family or in 20th Century Fox or whatever organization succeeded that, then the library cannot tell you anything. So you are left in the dark. You cannot reproduce that because unless you have written permission. Okay, who will give me the written permission? We cannot tell you that.
So Stavros Terry, you have to go and get these archives. Look at these archives for us.
Yeah. I'd just like to.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I just highlight something interesting? One of the documents which I have here is dated August 15, 1942, and it's from Homer W. Davis, who was the executive vice president of the Relief Association, and they wanted to send clothing to Greece, and that was actually refused, and they were asking for a reconsideration of that decision because what they were fearing was with the onset of winter coming that the death rate would have increased because of the lack of clothing and of course heat and of course it does say here that urgent appeals have been received from the representative of the Greek Red Cross in Switzerland for clothing and shoes, but particular for the sick and children. And it says we urgently request the department to give consideration to the shipments of small quantities of clothing for distribution to patients in hospitals, women and children, and a very small quantity of clothing for men. Even the sailors who brought shipments to Greece actually gave some of their clothing to these people to help them out at that time.
Ilias, who controls the Greek War Relief records? Okay, who do you have to get permission from to do something on it? Because I'm very fascinated by that.
This was a non-profit organization, and Skouras was president. I assume he was not even paid anything of that. But even in the case of 20th Century Fox, you are a paid executive, even though Skouras was the second largest stakeholder in the company. But still, he was an executive officer. So I don't think anybody should come and say this is property of a particular family, because this is a publicly traded U.S. corporation. I don't believe any lawyer can accept that this could be otherwise. But because you have so much material from so many sources, and I won't even mention anything coming from a governmental agency which belongs to the American people. There is no copyright there. If something comes from the White House, nobody should be allowed to claim copyright on such. Anyway, the thing for me, the best way to explore the Skouras legacy would be to digitize the entire archive.
Yep.
It's not impossible. The size of the archive is not huge compared to other collections. If a foundation like the few big mega foundations we have in Greece or in New York based can press Stanford and say, this is part of our history of Greek and Greek American history. We demand that you digitize that and make it available to the world, and we will contribute whatever amount, probably would be exaggerated, because these universities charge a lot. But that would be the ultimate solution, so that Terry wouldn't need to come here and pay, thousands of dollars in flight tickets, etc., or staying in Palo Alto in an expensive hotel. And the other thing, one could rearrange the documents in a way that he could follow the complexity of Skouras' life, because at the same time he was going to Greece or to the Middle East, supposedly to close a deal with local, firms or whatever. At the same time, he was having contacts with governmental officers, etc., trying to negotiate some kind of peace between, I don't know, Israelis and, Nasser's regime, etc. All of this happened at the same time. And this is a period where you could have these larger-than-life personalities like Skouras, who could, on the one hand, cut deals with the Russians about film distribution in the Soviet Union, and at the same time cultivate friendship with Khrushchev, or mentor some young Greek soprano like Teresa Stratas and other people. So it's a very complex life, and unless you have the proper attitude academically, not just boxes and folders and this and that, let us see, the entire trajectory of this life, how it evolved.
But what you not hinted at, you were very direct at, actually. The records include things that are part of maybe missing histories with regards to other organizations, other people, other politicians, other, whatever, internationally. So what you're saying is there's nuggets there that may be very important for studies and research on other people,
Exactly.
on other people. So I find that to be extremely fascinating, quite frankly, and in particular, I'm very interested in the Greek War Relief Association documents, because you touched on a lot of different organizations, whether it was AHEPA, GAPA, etc. And obviously GAPA disappeared years ago, decades ago, for various reasons. So this is fascinating. And also, does it relate to his behavioral pattern in terms of calling himself an American of Hellenic descent versus a Greek? So are there records like that also in terms of the psychology and philosophy behind that, or no?
For example, he was nominated, or he was pressed to accept the ambassadorship in Athens, Greece. But he refused, and the reason was always that he didn't want to have a conflict of interest, being an American at hand. Of course, he tried to help Greece. A lot of investments we heard, like Esopapas in Thessaloniki, and Skouras was involved in the early stages. Then Tom Papas got independent, etc., and did his own things. But there was always this kind of connection between the political, the business. It's everything interconnected in Skouras' life.
And I imagine even the issues relating to shipping are probably very interesting. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if some Greek shippers had to do with some of the issues that he ran across, actually. All right. Well, Marina, any other thoughts, questions for the panelists?
Well, I think the shipping industry, knowing the relationship that Hellenes have to shipping internationally, I know that Spyros was very proud of their contribution during World War II with regard to the merchant marine and the transfer of, running the blockade of the Nazis and the U-boats. But I think his contribution to shipping also needs to be examined because he wanted to modernize American shipping, and I know Onassis was very interested in doing that. And I
Well,
think
it wasn't only Onassis. There was a whole bunch of ship owners that probably would have an issue with it. So I'm sure if that analysis takes place, you'll find all types of wild things going on between Hellenic shipping families and Skouras in that regard. It would be very interesting to study that.
So I think if you look at the Eisenhower administration, that's really where Skouras is very important world figure. And, he's representing the United States government and also Eisenhower personally when he travels around the world. And, it seems to me that somebody like a historian, not a film historian, looking at the Eisenhower administration would do very well to look at this collection and see all these informal arrangements that are happening while Skouras travels around the world.
Yeah.
Well, based on this discussion, if some historians are listening, they're probably listening with their eyes and ears open, and they say, "Oh, we got to go into these records and do some research, and write some books." I'd like to start wrapping this up, so if we can, just some final comments. Marina, I'll start with you, if okay.
I want to thank all of our participants, especially you, Lou, for bringing Spyros to this important webinar, and I hope it continues to support his legacy and his accomplishments and achievements. I want to thank Professor Lev for his wonderful books and recommend them to our audience, and of course the memoirs that are here, the Spyros Skouras memoirs, which I recommend that Dr. Chrissochoidis wrote. And also to thank Stavros for his wonderful research and to encourage him to continue. Thank you, Lou.
Yeah, I will say a couple of things. I will say that we'll talk about Spyros Skouras, I think, more than once, because now, after listening to all this, there's so many angles that I'm sure a lot of the panel discussions we're going to have will, in fact, also relate to Spyros Skouras. And I thank you, Marina, for joining me on this particular thing. You're the one that brought up the issue. You said, "Lou, we've got to do something on Spyros Skouras," and you had given me a copy actually of Ilias's book as well as Peter's book.
I'll send you one.
So I'm thankful. Yeah, you did, and I'm thankful for that. Ilias, some final thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I would like to say let's use this discussion as a launching pad for something greater, because there are a lot of things to be done on this collection. We lost a lot of time because we had 20 plus years from the time he died to the time we had the collection available to the public, and almost another 20 years until we had these first books that are actually using the archive. So there is still work to be done, and as far as I'm concerned, whenever I have an opportunity, I try to collect material that are freely available. This one, for example, is a YouTube channel that I created. Some of the videos are mine, like from Greek Immigrant, whose slides I used, but some others are movie tone clips and stories that apparently the entire library has passed on to the Associated Press or some other, or British Movie Tone, and they are freely available on YouTube. So I have created these lists. So these are already publicly available. I'm just linking them, putting them together on the same page. So you can have some units I have here, Greek War Relief Associations, Skouras with political. So try to explore them. There is a lot of material that is still publicly available, but there is a lot that is in the vaults of Stanford and its storage spaces. And I really hope that it will become publicly available as soon as possible.
Thank you, Ilias. Thank you so much. Peter, some final thoughts, ideas?
I'm very grateful to be invited to be on the panel, and pleased to meet Ilias and Stavros. I've actually been interested in Ilias's work for a long time. I was aware of his books pretty much as soon as they came out. So I learned a lot today, and I agree that there are, one of the things that we did is we found there are some further avenues to explore. So I think it's a terrific result, and thank you, Lou, for putting this together.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for joining us. Stavros, some final thoughts? Are you with us, Stavros, or did we lose you? No, we got you.
It was a wonderful
You're breaking up.
You're breaking up, Stavros. You're breaking up. Well, Stavros, you're breaking up, but let me say this to you, Stavros, because you can't be with us. Let me say this. Stavros, I'm expecting you to write a series of articles in the National Herald relating to Spyros Skouras and some of the issues that we talked about, because I know you have a weekly column, and I hope you take a lot of the information that you've accumulated and what we've discussed today, and basically reawaken the thought process and interest in Spyros Skouras, who is indicated as being by Ilias America's most influential Hellenic immigrant. I'm not sure about the Alexander the Great thing, Ilias, but I like the concept. I will say to the audience, this was a fantastic panel, and this particular panel discussion is the first really of a series of discussions relating to EMBCA's Hellenic American U.S. semi-quintessential committee. And we're going to call it EMBCA 250 to commemorate America's 250th anniversary, which is coming next year, and to highlight the contribution of Hellenic Americans throughout the nation's history. Thank you to the audience for being here. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Marina, for helping and recommending that we make this the first panel discussion regarding this particular EMBCA 250 initiative. And to the audience, thank you again for being with us, as you always are. And of course, this panel discussion will be on YouTube on the EMBCA channel. Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Take care. Thank you.